we'll just get right to our talk. And
Yes.
Minister Bartlett, first of all, thank you for putting all this together. Thank you for having me back to a country that I like to call my second home. We go back a long time, you and I. But I guess in order to come up with a true definition of terms here, you know, in the traditional definition of the word resilience, it was sort of like the capacity to respond or the speed of response. Now you have to add something to that, the capacity to anticipate and the speed of preparedness.
Right.
And, you know, the Prime Minister pointed out so many different areas, whether it's natural disaster, pandemic, terrorism, cyber problems, or political, or just things that you cannot anticipate. This was born out of COVID, but actually it started way before that. So if you could, just so we get this started, give me your definition of resilience.
Well, resilience, I think, is the capacity to anticipate, mitigate, manage, recover quickly, and thrive. The essence of that, of course, is in perhaps two words: bounce back. And so bouncing back is very ineffectual if it isn't energized. And what energizes bouncing back is the capacity to recover and thrive. If you can't thrive, then we have a problem. Now, the average country that experiences disruption is thrown back in time. In most instances, they've lost GDP at a rate and a level that it's not redeemable in the short space of time. In some countries, with a little more capacity, we're able to recover and recover relatively quickly. But in almost every instance, and we in the Caribbean know that very well, disruptions have come, earthquakes, hurricane hit us. In Barbuda, we lost the entire island, as it were, to Hurricane Irma and Maria when that came through. In Dominica, we had 98% of the GDP loss. In Puerto Rico, we had 60% of GDP loss. Haiti, we remember when we had the earthquake 12 years ago. My God, we have not even...
Almost 13 years ago, 2010, right?
Well,
yeah.
we had one, I think, 10, 12 years ago as well, yes. And we have not recovered. And recovery has been slow, tedious, painful, and long. And in a lot of instances, the process has led to a level of dislocation of the social and economic fabric of the country that's almost irreparable.
Well, when you have tourism-dependent economies and you have a natural disaster, that destroys the infrastructure and the economic base almost instantly.
Absolutely. And so what we're trying to do here in discussing capacity building is to enable, firstly, individuals to understand what the responsibility is with regards to your own capabilities to predict, to respond, and more importantly, to build in relation to the expectations. For example, if we are in an earthquake zone, then you have to build in order to respond to the movement of the earth when it happens. California has known that well. Los Angeles does it well. Japan does it well. And some of us are learning to do it. Our friends in Turkey didn't do it well. So what we're saying is that...
But they knew about it. But they knew about it.
Well, I'm not so sure. The birds knew, perhaps.
I'm not talking about the instant before. I'm talking about the underlying situation.
Yes.
You talk about anticipating. This was not the first earthquake in Turkey.
Absolutely, quite correct.
Yeah.
But what didn't happen is the capacity was not built to respond and to respond in a manner that when the second one came, the disruptions would be minimal. So part of what resilience is to build that capacity to mitigate the effect, the impact of what is to come. And then when it comes, to be able to manage it well, and to recover quickly, and then to thrive afterwards.
Of course, if you're talking about the capacity to anticipate, that requires an investment.
It does. And in fact, it does involve a lot of intellectual rigor as well. A lot of work has to be done by way of research and study, a lot of data mining and analytical work to be able to predict, and to predict with some level of accuracy as to when and why and where and how. We at the Global Tourism Resilience and Crisis Management Center started thinking through establishing something of a observatory, where what you do is to be able then to forecast, to look at what are the conditions that give rise to certain things. And then if you can follow those, you'll be better able to predict when it is likely to come. Our meteorologists do a good job with predicting hurricanes in our space. And as a result of which, they could tell us a number of things that we need to do in anticipation in order to mitigate and hopefully then to manage when it comes, depending, of course, on the ferocity of it. We're now getting hurricanes that are off the chart. You know, when a hurricane literally devastates an entire country, like we saw with Barbuda, there was just a piece of rock left in the sea after the hurricane passed. So when it happens like that, and our friends in Puerto Rico were saying, my God, this feels like an earthquake. The force of the wind against the buildings and so on was like an earthquake, they said. That sort of ferocity is difficult to predict. But if you have enough knowledge as to what to do, you will be able to mitigate to a large extent, but more importantly, the impact would not be as devastating.
Part of the role of your group is essentially to become a clearinghouse of information.
Yes, very important. But it's also a communication center. And to make a reference to us again at the Global Tourism Resilience Center, this is one of the things that we do. Then we want to also develop a barometer, a resilience barometer, to be able to measure the level of resilience of countries, of entities, of organizations, of companies. And this is very important because that's going to give valuable information for huge management decision making, also for investment decisions, and for tourism, for decision as to when to travel, where to travel, and how to prepare yourself for destinations that you're going to. Now, this is a big task, that of developing the barometer, and a lot of work has started on it, but we have to do much more, and we need to get a lot of help also from some of our multilateral partners, because this is not something that the university here and us alone can do, because we're going to have to pull a lot from experiences in many parts of the world, and we will have to draw on the talent and skills and knowledge, as well as data that is now available to enable us to get a good sense of what are the key touch points, right. How do we prepare, a document which enables people to follow clearly and to be able to act properly.
But of course, before you get to that document, you have to have a conversation. And with all due respect to all of our guest ministers here today, my experience has been that the Minister of Engineering doesn't necessarily talk to the Minister of Tourism because they don't think they're connected. And the Minister of Labor doesn't talk to the Minister of Tourism because they don't think they're connected. But they are connected.
They are. Well, in fact, my definition of tourism, for example, is that tourism is really a confluence of many moving parts that all must come together seamlessly to create an experience, a product that we sell. So tourism doesn't exist as an entity unto itself. It only exists because all of these other factors are coming together. So the engineering, very vital. The agriculture ministry, very vital. The health ministry, very vital. The security ministry, very vital. The local government ministry, very vital. All of them. And if they don't exist, we don't exist.
Well, let me give you an example of how you can get everybody in a conversation. As you may know, the United States Congress is truly dysfunctional. They can't get along. Nobody talks to each other. Guess what? They're talking to each other about one thing right now. How did you get their attention? Cancel their flights. And now they're up in arms about how did this happen? So the real key here is to find common ground.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I mean, on a very basic travel level, the minister who's in charge of airports is not the minister of tourism, right? And that's interesting because the first impression you get, oh, okay, I'm going to talk to you later. We have an exception in the room. Then you're going to love this. Because if you talk to the minister of tourism in country A, they will tell you they don't control passport and border checks. Well, the very first impression you get of a country is what? 5-hour lines to get through passport.
Yes.
Or the worst impression you get is when you leave, and it's a 5-hour line to leave.
Yes.
So you need to get everybody in the room to talk because it is all interconnected.
Absolutely. And you know,
and you and I'll talk later, okay? Well, yeah, okay.
one of the ways that we try to get around this, of course, is to, in our case, establish something we call the Destination Assurance Council. Now, destination assurance is...
That came out of COVID, didn't it?
Yes, it came out of COVID. You're right.
Yeah.
And we just developed a policy on that, which we're going to implement. But what it meant is that all the entities and agencies that have to deliver on the demand of tourism, you bring them together in a single organization, committee or forum, whatever. In our case, it's a council. And the council has local government in it, we have health in it, we have agriculture in it, we have security in it, we have public health people, everybody. And it's chaired by a tourism person. And the job of that is to ensure that all the moving parts that must come together to create a seamless tourism experience for the visitor is brought together in one place for discussion. So once a visitor comes, we recognize, yes, you have to deal with safety on the road. So somebody's there to deal with safety on the road. You have to deal with public health issues, somebody's there. You have solid waste removal and management, somebody's there from solid waste. And also, because
Is there somebody there from traffic?
somebody's there from every...
I just thought I'd mention traffic. Okay.
Traffic, yes, road
That's
management.
true resilience.
Yes.
Here, yeah.
So we are satisfied that the effort is made to bring all the parties together. Now, whether we get the results that you want every time is another discussion.
Well, it all gets down, yeah, but it all gets down to money, which brings me to my next question. We talked about an investment to be able to, the capacity to anticipate. You have a minister of finance who collects taxes. Are there tax incentives for those in the private sector to make sure that the investment is made to anticipate?
Right. Well, you know, it's interesting that the whole business now of public policy for the legislative and regulatory framework to be established to ensure that there is compliance to the rules of engagement, because resilience building is also tied up into the whole issue of the rules of engagement and whether there's compliance to these rules.
But, you know, more than just compliance, Edmund, it's if you're going to build resilience, you have to make the case that it also builds the economy.
Indeed. And in fact, the economy knows that when disruptions come, they are the first casualty. So it is almost self-serving to be incentivizing the proper procedures and methods.
Which goes back to my question about tax incentives.
So
or some
sometimes
kind of,
it's not straight tax incentives. It is building capacity to manage better these processes. You know, my take on it is that it is not always about a tax incentive that drives efficiency and high levels of production and productivity. It's efficiencies that are derived from competence
and competition.
And good competition, but competition finds its way through competence and through efficiencies. And so the more efficient you are, is the more competitive you will be. And that's good for the economy. That's good for everyone.
So then the question becomes, you're all aware of the environment in which you live. You understand that you're in a hurricane zone or in an earthquake zone or in a tornado zone for those people who live in Kansas. And so you have to say at that point, okay, now that we know this, right, how do we build for that? Right? Now, you learn certain lessons. After the Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, they built up the levees.
That's correct.
Okay, but what is going on right now in the Caribbean, where you are so dependent on travel and tourism to make sure that we can't anticipate the ferocity of the storm. We just know there's going to be a few, right? It's inevitable. So what investments are being done now that you are communicating to the world as a model for their behavior elsewhere?
Well, that I think is tied up in a number of key government and private sector partnership arrangements. The decision to build better and to recognize that there are seismic issues here, and the science says that these are the ways that you build to deal with the outcomes of seismic events, that there are scientific and other proven methods and systems that will enable you to manage better when the hurricanes come. The ferocity is another issue, because if it comes at a level that you can't, you just can't predict. But what has to happen is that the institutional framework must be set up by the governments to begin with, supported by the private sector, to build that ability of people to respond properly, to act appropriately, and to build correctly. Now, one of the problems that a lot of small countries have is the whole issue of corruption in relation to these processes, that people short circuit, decide to forego what are the appropriate methods.
And the known methods.
What in common parlance we call cutting corners. And so we build with less efficiency, and we lose the effect of the sturdiness and the strength of the structures that we should have.
You know, one of the words we haven't talked about, but we need to, because it's the elephant in the room, especially even if we talk about the terrible disaster that's ongoing in Turkey, it's a four-letter word that starts with F. It's called fear. And part of resilience has to mitigate the fear. Right now, we know where the earthquake was centered in Turkey. We know that the human loss is almost, you can't even fathom it at this point, and it's going to get worse. But we also know where it was centered. If you talk to the travel and tourism industry that works in Turkey, they will tell you there's been another seismic drop-off in bookings, in meetings and conventions, in the things that drove the economy in the first place, in places that were not affected by the earthquake at all.
Correct.
So you have an educational challenge as well.
Right. So I made a point earlier that one of the big requirements to enable sustainable development and resilience building is communication. And being able to communicate accurately, to give proper data, and to guide with proper narratives, to create messages that are authentic and credible, and to stay on message. These are important in enabling quick recovery and quick response to disruptions when they come.
Well, as a member of the media, I can echo that by saying proper crisis management is sometimes saying you don't know. Sometimes saying we'll get back to you, as opposed to giving information that is completely, even with the best of intentions, either misleading or worse.
Accurate information, credible information, and also credible voices.
And the thing is, how many countries, how many destinations have a blueprint, have a manual of crisis management that they can actually refer to, so they're speaking with one voice, and that voice is credible?
Absolutely. Now, what you've said is why we need to have the Global Resilience Day, a day when people pause all over the world to reflect on these things and to develop resolves, to get better information, to get better education, to create better efficiencies, and to get the skills and the talent and the technology that is required to be able to respond to disruptions when they come. So we see the UN Declaration, for example, as a very significant international decision that all of us have an opportunity now to take personal responsibility for resilience building.
When you and I first talked, this is at least 2 or 3 years ago, about the development of this group, of this crisis group, it was all about communication then.
Yeah.
It was all about, crisis management, right? That's how it started, right? To be able to respond quickly with information that people could do.
Yeah.
You've gone way beyond that now.
Yes, that's how we started in 2017.
I know.
In London when we had the first discussion. Then we were talking significantly about how to manage crises that occur in various places. What we were not talking about then is how to innovate, how to develop new methods and systems and processes to forecast and then to prevent. Because part of what we need to do is to prevent. If we could find a way to prevent some of the things that are not preventable, like earthquakes, we can't deal with that. Hurricanes, when they come, we can't deal. But there are man-made disruptions. Disruption caused by, greed and corruption and anger and geopolitical strife and all sorts of
other environmental issues too.
Then the pandemics that come sometimes are driven by human action. How do you deal with that? So that's part of what the resilience movement has to respond to. It has to give people the tools to be able to anticipate and to manage better in the end, to recover well, and to be able to thrive afterwards.
Well, in the service industry, it's always been said that it's not the delivery of the service that matters, it's how you recover.
That's right. So,
and how you recover well.
right. Now, tourism is a good example of how resilience can, in fact, become a driver of quick recovery. Because tourism is seen as the industry of choice for the recovery of economies after disruptions. And we're seeing it right now. The pandemic came, some 5% of global GDP went. Tourism went from 432 million workers to 272. We lost GDP for Jamaica, for example, 20% of our GDP went down. But quickly after, because we were resilient, because we had already from even before the world declared a pandemic, we had set up our team to look at crisis management and to begin to prepare Jamaica for a possible fallout. And then when the world went into that mode of lockdown in March of 2020, by then Jamaica had established a recovery task force because we already knew that this is going to come. We didn't know a pandemic would be of worldwide proportion, but we knew that enough was happening to cause disruptions within the industry. So we established a recovery task force immediately. And that recovery task force's first job was to develop a series of protocols to manage this disruption. And we ended up with a document of some 300 pages of touch points, as science said, touch points as the WHO indicated, touch points as our experience was dictating. Because we didn't want to look only at what the world was saying, at what science was saying in its entirety. We also needed to look at what we were experiencing and how can we use that experience to mitigate the impact further on. And the result of all of that was we were able to recover fast, recover faster, and stronger. And in the first year of recovery, we brought in 1 million visitors. And by the time, and this is important to note, and by the time the world said that, okay, we are now open again for business, Jamaica was able to experience economic growth and the growth that we had for 9 consecutive quarters.
Because you were better prepared.
Because we were better prepared.
But there's something else that happened during the pandemic that we're just finally realizing now, and that is another component part to resilience, and that's traveler behavior changes and traveler behavior expectations.
Yes.
What we've seen so far is that during the pandemic, everybody was talking about pent-up demand. I think that's a little bit of a myth. There was always demand, but it got refocused. And it got refocused that most travelers did not want to buy material goods anymore. They didn't want to buy cars or clothing or jewelry or electronic items. They wanted to buy experiences.
Yeah.
And so which countries were better prepared, which destinations were better prepared to deliver those experiences in that bounce back category?
Right. And those countries that were better prepared, you notice the numbers for them have improved. I don't want to make any comparisons.
Oh, go ahead. They're all friends here.
Yeah, but certainly the Caribbean as a region recovered faster and bounced back better than any other in the world. I mean, we had up to last year, or last figures that came out show that the region, the Caribbean, was about 80% recovered for tourism. In case of Jamaica, we were 97% recovered at the end of this year. And now we are, for this year so far, we are 5% ahead of 2019, January to February so far.
So you have made comparisons.
So it's happening. And when we look at what's happening in other places, yes, it's there. But there are other places that have not. Asia, for example, have not. And Africa hasn't either. And so we have to look at, okay, now, what level of readiness and how do we now ensure that our partners across the world become ready? And that's what this conference is all about.
Well, one of the things we'll talk about a little later in one of my other panels is on airlift and connectivity.
Yes,
which is
of course.
a big factor in all
That's
this.
a big factor. Certainly, it's a huge one for tourism in general, because that's what we do. It's travel and tourism. And travel has even a larger portion of the income and earnings from tourism overall. Than tourism.
Right.
So we have to, in the case of small island states such as ours, we don't swim to destinations, right? You need air connectivity.
If anything comes out of this conference, it's that. No swimming. Okay.
So airlift is becoming the critical element for all of us.
It's airlift and connectivity within the region.
Right, but airlift and connectivity, our region is a little different because we are a kind of an archipelago, and we have islands. We don't have landmass where we have borders and so on. So you could take a train from Cayman to Jamaica, or you could take. You have to fly, or you come by boat, by sea. Now, that mode of transport in the world today is less utilized, only for cruise, mainly. But it's airlift. Airlift is about 90% of global travel.
And we'll talk about that a little bit later. One more thing I wanted to talk to you about, and that is we've heard data-driven solutions. Everything has to be data-driven. At a certain point, within every country, within every destination, you can throw that out and talk about intuition and basic common sense.
Yes, well, it's a mix, because data is playing a huge role now in informing decisions with regards to where people go, what they do. And I think that the hyperconnectivity that now characterizes our communication space allows for people to know much more about everything before they even go to where everything is. So people are making decisions about what to do, where to go, on a moment's notice now. The time lag for decision making has collapsed.
Much closer in.
Absolutely. People are making instant decisions because they have information and access. And
their sources of information are different than they used to be.
And sometimes, too, the experiences that they wish to have elsewhere, they want to experience it even virtually. So the technology is giving them a feel of things before they go. So All of these we have to contend with because they are now going to define the future of tourism. The whole issue of the Internet of Things and robotics and the full cognitive systems are going to define the future of tourism, the type of experiences that are going to be had, and what kind of accommodation you're going to have to prepare for this new demographic that is emerging based on what their own passion points are, what it is that they like, what it is that they want. And also, they are in a good position to make great decisions without any intermediary, because they have the information at their own fingertips. And
or they have the information they think is factual.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the information flow is so diverse.
But the one thing that's not arguable is the speed of that flow.
Well, that's correct.
And that's the real thing that, in terms of resilience and basically adapting, is the real challenge.
Right. And the bigger challenge for us now is to really get the knowledge available to everyone. That's the challenge.
And credible information.
Right. But the knowledge, hopefully, will give them the capacity to convert and to bring more practical applications to the things that they know. And once they're able to do that conversion, we can have innovation and we can be able to anticipate better and to respond better.
And part of that, of course, is the foundation of the organization.
Indeed. And so the Global Tourism Resilience and Crisis Management Center, now reaching out to other countries across the world, is expanding the scale, scope, and range of information flow and enabling more people to become involved in the process of determining what is necessary for their own situation and not necessarily what we are broadcasting to them as a whole. And I think this is a critical part. It's all about appropriate application. What is necessary for you in your location to be able to respond and to bounce back after disruptions.
You see that guy over there?
Yeah, he's telling us we're
He's telling us we got to go. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Edmund Bartlett.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, and Peter, for your excellent fireside chat. And it's quite cool here under the aircon, so the fire is now out. Ladies and gentlemen, we now move to our next session, which is to look into the tourism and economic outlook in the Caribbean region. And to discuss this, I'm delighted to introduce Mr. Rajan Datta, who will be in conversation with Mr. Henry Mooney. And if I could invite Rajan to come to the stage together with Mr. Mooney, that would be great.